Hey Jimmy, how you doing?
Doug, I'm doing great. Just hanging out,
Awesome.
reading some Kava research as usual. What else am I doing?
Oh, excellent. Yeah, no, that's incidentally that's why I brought you here today to to talk about some Kava research and some studies and some evidence on Kava safety. So that's overall kind of the discussion I wanted to have with you tonight. And are you game? Are you ready to go?
Sure. Let's talk about Kava safety.
Awesome. Well, I just want to start by kind of giving my story about my experience with the kava safety issue. And like this really goes back to when I first started drinking kava like 23 years ago. I remember I was working at a health food store in San Diego, and Kava King, I've told this story a million times, but Kava King was the only available powder form that I had access to. And the folks that worked in the herbal medicine department of this health food store in San Diego, I had a lot of anxiety issues, and they recommended kava to me, but they gave this caveat that we have heard that this can lead to liver failure. And I almost like I almost like didn't embark on this journey as a result of hearing that information from these I mean, uninformed, kind of just, wage workers who worked at this grocery store who like really weren't experts in anything. But I decided to give it a chance anyways. And like I didn't have access to the research or really know what was going on. So eventually, as I moved through my experience with kava, drinking kava stress relief yogi tea, and then eventually getting into the powders, I was told and reassured by many people that kava is indeed safe, and that there was this event that occurred in Europe in the late 90s that led to this negative association between kava and liver damage. And to this day, I still don't really have that that story kind of memorized. And I wanted to have a video podcast or video cast or whatever, so that people could kind of learn about what actually happened, where those kind of negative associations started, and what the truth is behind the liver scare.
We're going to start off with, you were talking about wanting to have this record on record of where you first encountered Kava, what was presented to you in terms of its possible toxicities. And I have to absolutely confirm that same story. When I first started looking into Kava, I went into, I think it was Whole Foods or Whole Body or something like that. And the signs that were up on the shelf said, if you consume more than 2 alcoholic drinks per day, do not take this for chances of rare liver disease. And yeah, I remember thinking, what? Like this is causing liver disease. But you have to remember that when when you were talking about this, the time frame in which you were speaking of, most of this research was not out yet. We were only dealing with adverse event reports, or what we thought were adverse event reports at the time. When we both of us were picking up Kava, it was still not a no. So we actually kind of did walk out on a ledge a little bit, with our limited knowledge of what was available to us. Of course, you have your empirical data that, you know, generation after generation, thousands of years of safe consumption in the islands. But yeah, I didn't have any sort of true idea of that scale and how well and deeply entrenched in safety it really was and has been for eons in the
Yeah.
past. And it's just, we were met with the same ignorance that basically surrounded us at the time. We came to us in the most filtered way, I guess it could have, because at that time it was still a little bit of hysteria going around, because it was
Yeah.
2003, 2005, 2006. This is when like all the news articles and stories were coming on, like, is this a killer or a cure? Is nature's Xanax really safe? Things like that were coming up. So at the
Yeah.
time, if you said you drank kava, the only reaction you could get is, have you had your liver checked? Is your liver okay? And that's, I guess it's to be expected for what we were dealing with at the time. But from there, I mean, it kind of, when we got it, it had already kind of crescendoed all of the, I guess I won't say misinformation, because I don't believe this is willful misinformation that was presented. I think that this was a hysteria where people were requested to turn over all of the adverse event reports that had anything to do with Kava whatsoever. Of course, Kava was an approved pharmaceutical treatment at the time in Germany and Switzerland and EU. So a bunch of people were taking Kava lactone products, they're Kava lactone extracts. And the size of the actual issue is a hotly debated but put to bed sort of issue. It's no longer what people think it is. The whole liver issue, it was concentrated in one area. It was in Switzerland and Germany, and that's where these actual issues, if there were any, were concentrated, which also happens to correlate to the same time when the first few batches of a different type of Kava left Vanuatu for processing in Germany. But
so what year was this, Jimmy?
This was back in 1990. The years of it boiling up to the actual start of the issue was 1998, and the end of it was around 2002, 2003.
Okay.
And this is the only thing in the entire history of Kava that would connect it to anything we would consider toxic. And it's temporal. It's a temporal association. If you had a time machine, you could hurt your liver with Kava, but outside of that, that's not going to happen. And I mean, but it's easy for us to sit up here and say, oh, it's safe,
Yeah,
but
right.
at the same time, it's difficult to truly convey that without evidence. And, I'm a study of one, you're a study of one, but this has been going on. These studies have been going on for 2,500 years now. So
yeah,
it's spoken for itself. The safety record is there, where we see instances and say there are some like liver scares in Fiji, where people were thinking that Kava was causing liver problems in Fiji, but it turned out to be liver abscesses caused by amoebas in water supply. So I mean, it's and that's not to like try to shift blame. It just truly is not Kava that's capable of causing these sort of issues that it was people thought it would do. I mean, and at the time, we're talking about extracts, and we're talking about these pharmaceutical preparations. In fact, that's all that Germany banned, was the pharmaceutical preparations, because that's the only sort of interaction it had with Kava. So that's, we've gone from that, the Germany banned Kava and didn't necessarily make it illegal, just kind of took it off the market, removed it from all the market authorizations. And then after that, Kava took a turn, and let's see what else happened after that. I'm going to have to take a sip of my water and recap. But
I was going to jump in with a comment too.
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, one thing that the younger generation and maybe the younger viewers of this of my YouTube channel might not realize is that back then, in 2000, 2001, 2002, it was very difficult to access a lot of information in general. I mean, the internet was alive and well, like there were no smartphones, that's for sure. But I mean, to do research on Kava, like you would go to the library, like you would have to go and put in the effort of tracking down, primary source documents or journals, not online. Like most of these online services for journals didn't exist back then. So all that you had was basically what people told you. You had narratives that were produced, and like you said, I mean, this 1998 to 2003, all of this was happening, and it was like, oh my God, like this is going to destroy our livers. or maybe not. And I at that time I didn't know anything about Fiji or Vanuatu, so I wasn't thinking about the fact that indigenous people in these countries have been drinking kava without adverse effects for thousands of years, simply because I had no knowledge of those, the existence of these cultures. So it's what's amazing to me is that it's 2023 now, and yet when you Google kava, despite all of this wealth of information and all of this evidence, this is still a narrative that dominates.
Yes.
And why is that? Why do you think that is?
It's low-hanging fruit for blog authors to pick, in terms of it's an easy story and it doesn't take much research other than going to Google and just typing in Kava liver damage. And you don't have to, what it requires is it requires insight into looking into the quality of these reports and how they were taken and what other events were involved and all these things. But no, they just say 100 cases of liver issue. It's like, wait a second, it's not that simple. Just at this time frame, even those 100, they've pared it down to maybe 2 or 3 of those that were actually related to kava, in terms of them being what was it called, a immunologic reaction, where they were truly allergic to it and it caused them to have an adverse reaction to their, with their liver. But we're talking, this is probably more likely to people eating bananas than it would be to people drinking kava. It's one of those things where there's some people that just aren't compatible with some things. And
right.
I mean, even kava has a bit of an immune portion of it as well. I mean, it has that. Some people can be allergic to it right off the bat, where they have hives and breakout and rashes and things like that. That is possible. It's not common, but it is possible. But in terms of actual damage and safety, kava is very safe food. And I want to skew away from the word drug here, because I think the word drug is more the connotation there would be like it has more of a singular effect. And this is it's a obviously has a pharmacological effect, but it's not singular. It's not overpowering. I know it is a drug because it does have a physiological change from consumption of the substance, but it also is a food, and it is a substance more than it's also a cultural keystone species.
Sure.
It's not just one thing, and it's not just single dimension. It's a very deep subject with many different angles to it. And the one thing that we do see repeated over history is the continued safety of kava, even when things go wrong with kava, where someone drinks too much, or we saw recently where I think it was an Australian prime minister drank Sakau and Pompeii. And
what's Sakau?
Sakau is kava, but not made with water, made with the sap of the hibiscus tree, the bark and the sap, which is really slimy and viscous. They use that instead of water, and maybe a little bit of water, but it makes a horrendously strong kava beverage that is sipped. It is not chugged. They pass around a cup and sip a bit at a time, where an Australian prime minister went and chugged the entire cup and ended up in the hospital for a couple of days just for observation. There was nothing wrong with him. He just couldn't walk. And he said the last time he slept like that, he was a teenager, but the guy was fine. I mean, it's whenever it's not a common thing for us to see any real harm come from kava consumption. And we've seen, I mean, with all the connections that we have in the avenues that the information could come to us, it really, if this were harmful, I think we'd be hearing about it all day long. Like that's all we would hear about. That's all we would talk about, is like, how do we make these people stop thinking it's harmful when it truly, like, there's no liver problems. I have my liver tests done annually and have yet to have anything related to kava show up on that. I've had issues because of my vitamin D levels, but kind of the light that's here now is my son, so that's probably why. I'd say it's probably the lack of outdoor exposure, but I can
Yeah.
thank my job and my hobbies for that. So
Yeah, you need to take your dog for more walks is what is what
I
I'm
think
thinking.
so. Yeah, during the day
Yeah.
at least.
Yeah, and yeah, it's interesting because one of the when I was a young kava drinker in my 20s, one of the things I thought about constantly, I watched, some of my friends fall into like deep alcoholism and drug abuse. And I was really stressed out because I was a very, very type A personality with crazy like work ethic when it came to school. Like I could study for like 12 hours a day, and but the kava at the end of the day was my reward, and it would calm me down and help me go to sleep. And then I would see my friends like doing all this really kind of risky behavior, engage in risky behaviors, whether it's kind of sex addiction or alcoholism or drug abuse. And in my mind, I was like, well, I have heard about these liver issues. I've also seen, even at that time, I saw some things online that the liver issues were not real. And but compared to the way I saw other people treating their bodies, I was like, well, this is definitely preferable to those other addictions and associations with ways of calming yourself down. And then lo and behold, 10 15 years later, it comes out that like there was never any real risk with kava. So it's like, oh, that easily one of the best decisions of my life is like
Yes.
drinking kava.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I tell everyone, if you have a decision, if you can make a decision to drink kava over doing the stupid things we used to do as kids, like drink kava, it's so like your life is so much better. It's
Right.
so much
It's true.
less less complicated. Like it's, problems are so much smaller. You can, handle them better. But in terms of the kava regulatory stance in Germany, in 2014, Germany actually had overturned the ban, the actual reason for the ban. All of the adverse event reports were marked out. So we technically have nothing to stand on legally for a ban for kava in terms of its safety. It's just not there. Germany has removed that, and that's basically what the world built their ban of kava on, was the fact that it harmed livers here. When
Yeah.
they've thrown that out now. So really, and all of these blog articles are wrong. There are not people out there dying on the streets from jaundice from drinking kava outside the kava bars, turning yellow. Yeah, it's just not happening. And kava is being consumed at an ever increasing rate. From the kava bars that are opening to the amount of people that are online that are getting into it, it's just becoming a much more consumed beverage across the United States. And we still do not see this predicted increase in liver, failures and liver problems and all that. It's just not there.
Yeah.
This whole thing was a big batch of maybe some sort of toxin slipping through the supply, and it was a manufacturing issue, and it's not an intrinsic issue. They have yet to find anything in kava that would negatively affect your liver, except when you get into doses where it would be kind of equal to you draining out a tanker truck worth of kava at once in one shot, like into your
Right.
bloodstream. Like it's that, then like we don't work on those scales, and it's interesting if you read through the research, the older
Yeah.
research and through the early 2000s, in order to they were basically looking to elicit an effect with kava instead of looking to see where that threshold of effects were with the organism. So they would just load up these samples with kava lactones until something toxic happened. And that's what we saw, and that's what they based most of a lot of the negative press about kava on, with these studies that were on concentration levels that were astronomical. I mean, we're talking several orders of magnitude larger than what we would consume as a human in a normal setting. It's just you couldn't shoot this amount of kava lactones in your veins if you had a pressure washer hooked up to you. It's just like it's not going to happen. Like, I mean, we're just
this is in mice, right? This is
mice, rats. They've tested
right,
on
yeah.
dogs, cats. Quite a number of animals have been tinkered on with kava and tested with kava.
I mean, it's kind of like, like caffeine. I mean, imagine, 50 grams of caffeine being injected into your bloodstream.
Right.
I'm assuming that you're probably going to have an adverse event report from that, right? And it's
slightly,
but it's just completely ridiculous to like try to imagine what a real life scenario of having that much caffeine in your bloodstream looks like, or kava lactones.
You would be, I mean, like your heart would be pumping just powdered caffeine or just thick kava lactone paste. Like it's just, yeah. I mean, and these are all in vitro studies, so they're all outside of the organism. They're all in cells and petri dishes and all that stuff. So, I mean, I don't want to discredit science because we only move as far as the smartest person, the latest discovery. We're at that time, things weren't as advanced as they are today, and I get it, but we do need to, as creators online, to stop digging up these old articles and rehashing things that might get a click for Kava when they realize that we're actually digging into a cultural issue that could be construed as quite insensitive.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, number one, it doesn't cause liver failure. It doesn't cause that stuff. That is a lie. Second, it hurts these small island nations that make a good percentage of their income from kava cultivation and export. So I mean, it's like you're harming people for basically nothing, and we need to. And yeah, we'll come back. I'll come back to that, but there is one more thing I wanted to talk about in that area, were the liver warnings on the packaging of our kava products that we sell. I know that the center, what is it? The CRN, the Center for Responsible Nutrition, recommends the warnings. However, I challenge that. There is no evidence to suggest that those warnings are applicable to kava. And it even says in the CRN recommendation that there is no warning, and that it was made out of due caution. I think it's time that we can bury the hatchet here. I think it's time for us to say, it's been 20 years. Like, it's been 20 years since those rash of issues happened in Europe. And we have not seen anything in that 20-year span afterwards. So it's like we need to say, let's call it. Let's give these people a plant.
No, I wanted to comment on that because that's actually, I think, one damage narrative, or the continued liver scare narrative, is the fact. I mean, whenever I introduce somebody to kava and I show them the packaging and they look at it and they kind of turn it over in their hands, there's those bullet points. Do not consume if you've had liver issues. Use in moderation, not because of drowsiness, but because of liver issues.
Yeah.
And I feel like when people see that, they think of cigarette warnings, like the Surgeon General's warning, like smoking causes cancer, and which is true.
Right.
But with kava, like, you get that package, and people like you and I and people who are really into kava know that advisory is unfounded and based in 25-year-old a 25-year-old event that had an adverse effect on a couple of people. But the fact that it's still being printed on every bag, I think, perpetuates that narrative and that harm. But I'm not gonna point my finger at vendors yet, because I do feel like it's kind of a way of covering your own, protecting yourself, because until it becomes a common thing for them not to have those warnings. I think vendors are going to feel obligated
They
to
do.
include some kind of,
They
yeah.
feel obligated because the people before them felt obligated.
Right,
And
right.
that's the only reason, because I have a bag here. It says Kava can affect your motor skills. If you're using any prescription medication, especially antidepressant or anti-anxiety medication, do not drink Kava before consulting your physician. That's also not really necessary. Alcohol and Kava should never be mixed. Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. Women who are nursing and pregnant should not drink Kava. This is the one where actually I have to agree with, because there are, and this is only a matter of time before we have the information, but there are no studies on Kava and being passed through breast milk or through the placenta. So we don't really know how that would affect a developing child. So we always say, if you have to ask a question in that area, it's best to be safe and just hold off. But
I
the
would agree
last
with that.
one,
Yeah. Yeah.
the last one here says, do not drink Kava if you've had prior liver problems such as hepatitis. And that one is just, I think that is unnecessary. I mean, this is from 2013, so this is an old bag of Kava, but it's not necessary. I've actually, I mean, this is, once again, disclaimer, study of one. I was in the hospital in 2020 for when COVID came through the first time, which is really fun. And when I got out, I'd just gotten my new primary care doctor, so he did a full panel test, metabolic test, and my liver panel was off. I was out of the range in AST and ALT. Like, I had liver issues from all the drugs and stuff that they gave me in the hospital. And I actually, and this is again, disclaimer, one study, me. I drank Kava, and when I got out of the hospital, I drank Kava the whole time between that test and my next test, which was in, I believe it was 3 months or 2 months. It was like, yeah, it was 60 days after that test. And I drank Kava that entire time, and my values went back to normal during that time. So not only, I'm not saying Kava is restorative or healing to the liver, but it's not harmful. It doesn't impede any healing processes. It doesn't seem to cause any further insult. I mean, yes, all things that we consume are processed through the liver, and most things. I mean, there are a couple of things that do some weird stuff, but yeah, the liver is a very resilient organ. Look how long people drink before they die. It can go for many decades, and it is a very efficient organ. I mean, it can grow back from just a piece. It's very unique for us to have something so useful and regenerative. But the Kava is not going to cause your liver to fail. It's not going to cause your, to turn, yellow. It's not going to cause you to have jaundice and all that stuff. It's just that has all been proven not only false by the wealth of information that we have available to us now, but also through just empirically looking over the millennia of consumption. We don't have tales of, the yellow uncle or this or that, or, in terms of that has anything that ties back to a noticeable liver failure issue. So it's like, and yeah, you have that with alcohol, like you have that sort of things. And I mean, that's just part of it. That's not part of the history of Kava. It's just not.
Right. I'm wondering if, you can speak a little bit to the history of the treatment of, I don't, this is a lot to put on. So this is a kind of a loaded question, but the history of Kava use amongst Australian Aborigines and some of the legislation that was created and implemented in Australia to prevent indigenous communities, Aboriginal communities from consuming Kava, and whether you think there's a relationship between that and the negative image of Kava as an unhealthy food.
Direct image from that. And the first studies came out in the late 1980s by Cott Matthews and a few other authors. But there's those two, specifically Cott, even later admitted that his studies were to prevent the harms of Kava being bestowed upon the people that he cared so much about, because he himself did not understand Kava. Therefore, it was a exotic other that was going to do the same thing in his mind as alcohol did to these Aboriginal people. Obviously, that is not the case. every study out of that time said they were consuming far more than the entire South Pacific were consuming, and that absolutely was not true. They were doing just the average. They were drinking the average amount of kava, and for, if you know Fijians, that's a lot. I mean, it's not a little bit, but it's nothing crazy. But it was seen as something that was a risk, an unnecessary risk to people already at high risk of these issues. And they came out of studies on Aboriginal people that had pre-existing health issues and can be traced back to the living conditions at the time, and how forgotten these people were. But it was introduced to curb the consumption of alcohol, and it worked. Yeah. It worked so well that they didn't like that, because like people started liking it as, you know, a replacement for their alcohol. And
right.
You know, of course, it's not going to make you, you know, hit your wife or yell at someone that you just saw on the side of the street. Kava's not that sort of confrontational, doesn't bring on that state. And I think that it was a concerted effort in the 1980s to keep kava out of Australia, which kind of turned into a little bit of a backbone for the ban that they had prior to just 2020, during the start of I think 2021 or 2020, when they started the kava pilot in Australia. Kava was illegal, and it still is illegal in Northern Territory. You cannot ship into Northern Territory. That's not, you know, it's off limits. But truthfully, I mean, it's a much better option than consuming alcohol.
Oh my god, yeah.
So not just health wise, like just mentally,
everything,
society, and I mean, just it's something that brings people together, and it's not that far removed from the people of the South Pacific. I mean, the Austronesians are basically the Aboriginal people from Australia had moved across through the South Pacific, but
right.
Yeah, I mean, it's not that far of a stretch for them to drink kava, even, you know, looking at the history of their people. So it truly is, you know, a nanny state sort of thing, where they saw it as a threat, and it still continues. And that you can see people quote those things all the time. And this is actually where the original liver failure quote comes from, is the 1988 study from Matthews, where he says that he observed increases in GGT, which corresponded to liver failure in these consumers. And a increase in GGT can mean a lot of different things, but it definitely does not mean alone liver failure. It is not the indicator for liver failure. It's not what's used for that. And I'm not sure if at the time they knew that or not, but that was the first time that kava was implicated in being something, you know, wrong with the liver, is in 1988. But again, this was not correct, and high alcohol consumption can cause high GGT readings as well. That's a known fact. But it also it also could increase GGT, and even that would not be indicative of liver damage. It could just be adaptation to some CYP effect where it's inhibiting something. But the only thing, I mean, I guess let's talk about what. And this is, I've been accused of this before, and I look back at how I talk and what I say online. I'm like, yeah, I guess you're right. But what are the real, actual negative side effects of kava? Like what are the actual negatives? We talk about all the positives all the time, but I can identify one that's obvious, and that's definitely the dry skin. That's, if you drink kava every day, you're eventually going to find out that your skin's it's going to try to run away. That's just that's the best way to put it.
Not everybody.
You're right. You know, but if you drink it hard enough and for long enough and the wrong way enough, you can make your skin very angry. And it's a kind of an interaction with there's a surface layer on your skin that stays just slightly moist. And they're called ceramides, and they kind of make up the matrix between your skin cells at the very top. And kava slightly inhibits the formation of that layer, which allows moisture to escape faster and causes that weird scaling issue. If you look up ichthyosis, which is a skin disorder that is autosomal and usually congenital. No, it is congenital, but it's a lifelong condition. But it very much mirrors cases of like very bad dermopathy. It has the same scaling pattern. It has the same like hyperlinearity, which means their hands look like they have, they're like they're 90 years old, which I've been there. So, but they're the one that's not talked about very much is sty. Well, this styes will be about a kind of lower on the list, but styes can get to be an issue if the skin problem is aggravated for long enough that
that's around the eyes,
right? That's when you get like pimples on your eyelids, basically, and oh man, that's one of the most. It's really annoying. It's very annoying.
Oh yeah.
God,
no joke.
But I mean, it's if you drink a lot of kava, that's a possibility. And also cholesterol levels. We've seen that cholesterol levels may increase if you drink kava on a daily basis and at a high clip, like we're talking 50, 60 grams a day. We might see some higher cholesterol levels in terms of your HDLs will be higher, which is arguably a good thing. And your LDLs will be higher, which is arguably a bad thing. We don't truly know what that means in terms of its physiological effect, because we don't see heart problems in kava drinkers. That's not a common theme. And that's what we would, if we were to see cardiovascular issues, we'd be like, okay, well, maybe maybe those are connected there, but that doesn't seem to be an issue with it. It could be a change in the size of your LDL and HDL particles, which which may have no effect at all with your cardiovascular health. So it's, I mean, we don't know exactly what that is, but that is also a negative side effect that is not very much, it's not really talked about all that much, because it's one of the ones that's spoken about in literature, and I see it online and I see it in my own tests, but I'm still scared to say something about it. But I've got another kava vendor get a specific type of cholesterol test that's unique to lipoproteins, and to see if maybe there is something something there. And it came back that he had no increased risk of cardiovascular issues, even with that increased cholesterol level, because the lipoproteins weren't elevated to a certain level or something like that, but it wasn't indicative of a heart issue state. So we don't think it has anything to do with the heart, but it's just, I think it might be an after effect of its cholesterol metabolism interference, the way it interferes with the metabolism of the cholesterols in your skin, which make up the ceramide layers. Could also be reflecting in different things that it's also inhibiting, but go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think it's important for people to remember that, like, the comorbidities, I mean, you can know a kava drinker who develops a liver condition. You can know a kava drinker who develops heart failure,
right?
And that correlation with them drinking kava does not mean that kava is responsible for that illness.
Right.
And I think that's important to remember, because what if somebody in this community gets sick, if that unfortunate tragic thing was to happen, like, people might jump to the conclusion that, oh, it's all that kava they're drinking, and it's just a very simple, it's a very simple thing to remember, that, like, correlation is not causation, and we're all people die eventually, and all people get sick on a consistent basis.
And if you drink kava for your entire life, I guess you could blame everything on it eventually.
Right, exactly.
My hair's getting thinner. I think it's the kava.
Right. I mean, for me, one reason that I take breaks from kava is if I drink kava every day, which I normally do. I normally drink kava every day, but I like taking breaks from kava for a while, just to kind of see how my body reacts. And one thing I can kind of notice a little bit sometimes is like a little bit like marginal increase in the quickness of my thinking, but I think it might just be kind of psychological, or like I'm doing something else rather than drinking kava in the evening. It's kind of engaging my my cerebral processes more. But like, and also like if like I'm like feeling down or depressed about something, I find that kava can sometimes make me feel like a little bit more like maybe a little bit more depressed. So I avoid kava when I'm feeling kind of down in the dumps about something.
It's funny. It does. I think kava is one of the most interesting placebo effect consumables that we'll ever know of, because it has such a light effect to it. When people drink kava, they expect to get plastered, and that's just not. I mean, you can get there, but you're more likely to throw up before you get plastered. And it's a different experience. It's very light, so that allows you to kind of ascribe your own details to it, your own little
Yeah,
things. Because I mean,
very good
I
point.
was talking to someone today. I've seen people say that kava cured their toenail fungus. Like, I mean, it's incredible what people will think, and but that's good. I mean, you I guess we could be complaining that people are saying, it's called making my hair fall out when I'm 45, something like that. But so I guess we should pick our battles. But it's just an interesting plant. It doesn't have that predictable every time sort of like, this is what kava feels like. Like, it could be a little different every time.
Oh yeah.
It'll change on a daily basis based on how you're feeling, based on what you've eaten, based on your really heavily based on what you've eaten. But it's a unique plant with very subtle effects that have just the ability for you to add whatever you want to it. I mean, which makes it awesome. But it also makes it hard to nail down when someone's like, "What is kava?" It's like, well, it is what it's relaxing, but it's also can take on, for me, it's what initiates my sleep. Like, when I drink
Mhm.
kava, I'm
Right,
going to
right,
sleep. Like, I'm going to bed. Like, there is no stopping. It's like a freight train, and that's just part of my routine at night.
right, right.
I don't wake up and I think I
It's
need
a
kava.
it's a switch. Like it's
Mhm.
when I make my kava in the evening, it's like that's when I know that like the crappy part of my day is over.
Right.
Like
Yeah.
it's like, okay, now I'm making my kava. Now I'm gonna get into that headspace where it's like I'm not gonna stress out about my job, my kids, my whatever it might be that I might be worried about that day. And I'm just gonna drink some kava and I'm gonna like read a book or read a comic book or play video games or watch a movie or get online and talk with my friends and just like not stress about anything. And then eventually you have like really good sleep. That's kind of what I associate with kava. The other thing I wanted to mention, and you brought this up earlier about the effects of kava lactones if you like had a tanker truck full of kava lactones kind of coursing through your bloodstream. And this also, I would connect to the conversation about Australian Aborigines, is kava there's a limit to how much kava you can drink. And what I mean by that is like you can only drink so much kava before your body's like, okay, that's enough kava. Like because you
Yeah.
start to feel a little bit like bloated and full, and like you might even feel a little bit nauseous, and
Hmm.
like you just kind of know like, okay, I've had enough kava, but then you're fine. Like then you wake up the next day and you're fine.
Right.
And I think that's like I think that's a human universal. I mean, for me certainly, there's a point to where I'm like, okay, I've had enough kava,
Yeah,
and
I
I'm
mean,
not going to drink.
dude, I love my, euphoric substances, man. I cannot get enough. Like, if I have one, I want 50. I want to know what it feels like when I do 20 of those things, But kava is like, whoa, let's slow down here. If you're drinking it in a session, of course there are those
Yeah,
people that I couldn't, I couldn't hold any sort of semblance of matching them to drinking their kava. But it really is I mean, it's just, it like has its own limits for me. And I mean, that's what brought me to it. That's what made me so interested in it to begin with, was like,
mm-hmm.
I want to abuse this stuff, but like, I don't want to
You can't.
abuse this stuff. Like, it's like it has its brakes built in. It doesn't,
Yeah,
it doesn't it doesn't beg you to continue on. For 99.99% of people,
yeah,
there are that 0.01%, man, that I don't know if something's wired differently in their system, but it's just they really there's some there. I think I've met maybe one or two people that were like, this is truly addictive for me. I can't take this. I'm like, that's okay. I appreciate you being honest. Like, and that's, that's rare. I'm not going to tell you you're wrong, because there's everybody, we all, everything going on between our two ears is ours. I can't tell you what you're doing. But I mean, it's very rare. I mean, the addictiveness of Kava, I think, is wrapped up in when we speak about the safety of Kava. Will I unload my bank account into Kava and make sure that my basement's full of it, that I have enough when I wake up in the morning that I can have Kava? It doesn't do that. I will, even today, having drank Kava for almost 20 years, I will almost run out. Just like, oops.
Oh yeah.
Guess
all the time. Yeah.
Guess I'll just buy some more. It's not a huge it's not a huge deal. Like, it's, and I'm not, that's alien to an addict, because it's you always think when you're doing a drug, if you do a drug that's your drug of choice, like, you're going to do pretty much anything to get that and maintain that supply. Kava is almost a take it or leave it thing. I mean, I love Kava, and I never want to say anything bad, but it has, it's like, it's great, but it's not too great. Like, it's not too great. I don't know how to, it demands respect without disrespecting you. But if you disrespect Kava, it will disrespect you. That's one of the things
that's very true. Yeah.
People don't really realize that if you put on a 3-day bender and you try to drink Kava for like 72 hours straight, it's not going to feel very good. You're not going to feel very good. You might throw up a few times.
And I've been there before. I remember I did a little like Kava tour of South Florida once, and I was there for 3 or 4 days, and I drank like 30, 40 shells per day for 3 days straight. And I do remember I hit a limit where I got the optic nerve in my eye, like, basically just like went into, like, it started protesting, and I could not like see straight. Had double vision. And I was like, okay, I need to go back to the hotel, drink a lot of water, and like sleep, like
close one eye.
and it was like I was drinking too much Kava. It was like because I only had a limited amount of time, and there were all these Kava bars, and I was like, this is heaven. But the consequence of that was, like, I drank way more Kava than I have ever drank in my life. And yeah, it actually made me respect Kava more, because I was like, okay, this is something I drink almost every day with no negative side effects, but drinking in these like copious amounts for my YouTube channel is it's punishing me a little bit.
Yeah. And even when I went to Hawaii, had a Talanoa before the big Talanoa, and there was a joke. There was a really big shell he had sitting beside him when he was making Kava. I was like, how do you get to drink from that one? And it was the punishment shell. I was like, oh, what do we have to do to be punished? But then it's like, then I started drinking, and the circle, and got all the shells going. And I was, at that point, I think either it was me or my wife, or both of us were like almost on the verge of puking. It was like, all right, I don't want the punishment shell anymore. I'm good. But I mean, that's alien to me, because I would, if I did a drug, and of course there I go saying drug, but if I did anything that I felt like was changing myself, I would do it until it was gone. Like it was like on or off. Where Kava is like, I look forward to having Kava at night. But is it something where if I don't have it, would that be the end of the world? Would like a cold sweat start beating up my forehead, and like, get the shakes, and like start, worrying, get the goosebumps and everything? No, it's not. It's not a big deal. And I say that having come from opioid addiction, having quit opioids several times, unfortunately, it has that like mental sort of grip on you that, it's just the withdrawal is only a portion of it. And it's Kava doesn't latch into you like that. It's a safe food.
Yeah. No, I mean, I've skirted with alcohol abuse, and I smoked cigarettes until I was in my early 20s, and I remember what addiction feels like, and like I said before, I can go months and months without drinking kava. Like sometimes when I travel, I run out of kava, and I'm just like, oh, okay, well, I guess I don't have any more kava, and
I
then I
guess it's
just do
crack.
something else. Like, yeah, right, yeah. Then I just do something else. Like I might even like just like in the evening, I might just read a book, and then as I'm reading, I fall asleep or whatever. But yeah, kava is not. I've never had any like kava withdrawal
Oh,
situation where I was freaking out and I needed my kava or else I was gonna die and sweating.
yep.
But yeah, Jimmy, thanks. I mean, I think this was. I hope this is an informative discussion that people get a lot out of. I really appreciate all the work you've done to socialize this knowledge online. I think it's invaluable. I mean, my Kava Sewer channel is mostly just kind of a fun thing and me trying different types of kava and letting people know how they affect me. But you've always been the guy that I go to with the with the questions about kava science and the actual health ramifications of drinking kava. And this is a great discussion. So thanks so much.
Doug, if you didn't have that blog, I don't know if we'd be here, because that's where we all came from. I mean, this is all sort of, this is what you've put together. Like we came around this. Like we saw something here that you saw, and it was just like, this is interesting. We had nothing else to see on the internet, and here comes Douglas. And I mean, it was just history from there. I'm glad that we're still doing this. This is awesome.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's been
thanks for having me, and thanks for talking about this, because we need to talk more about kava and the safety, because obviously some people are still worried. But you know what? It's
yep,
okay. You can, and questions are
yep,
encouraged. So if you have a question about
absolutely.
it, don't hesitate. Pick a platform and ask away.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
All right, thanks, Jimmy.
All
We'll
right,
catch
man.
you.
Yes, sir.
Bula.
Bula.